Hi, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today is our kickoff to the IDRPP Project ECHO, Healthy Relationships. We're really excited to have you join us today. Just a few things about ECHO. If you've never joined one, we do record the session. It will be on our website for you to go back and review that. ECHO is a really interactive participation. So if you want to ask your questions, put them into chat, raise your hand, turn your cameras on. It's really a great way to just be engaged with everybody on the call. Case narratives are a great way to solidify information. So if you have a client or a family member or just a personal experience that you want help with, please consider submitting a case presentation on that, or a case narrative, a problem, dilemma, whatever you want to call the case discussions. As always, we are talking about some sensitive topics, so avoid using first, middle, or last names. De-identify any of the situations. You can reach out to one of the hub members. If they have not renamed themselves, they will, and they will all have an asterisk in front of their name. So you can reach out to them. Key components of an ECHO are really that community of practice or knowledge sharing. We will always have a didactic speaker and a case presentation where we then talk about feedback on that case. Zoom, we've all been on Zoom for a little bit, quite a long time. I think that Zoom's never going away. 4 years ago, we never thought we were going to have it, right? But we probably all know how to rename our profile, raise our hands. Renaming that profile just lets us know everybody on the call. So for instance, I can see Lisa on my screen right now. She might share something that's really interested. I know then where to reach out to her. So if you'll just put where you look. So see, she just renamed it so easily. Thank you, Lisa. So when she shares something brilliant, I know that my first step is to reach out to somebody at DHHS and track down how I get a hold of Lisa. Raising your hand, again, you can raise your hand or just unmute. We'll give you a call. We also will monitor that chat. So Tony Nelson and myself will monitor that chat. Registration is always gets you those materials ahead of time so you can get some weekly announcements. Please feel free to email us at projectecho@usu.edu. We do send out a credit of attendance after you fill out today's survey. So we will be dropping the survey in throughout the session in today's chat. And then we send you out a credit of attendance. Canvas is where we store everything. So we will invite you to our Canvas page where you can find the materials, the case recommendation, feedbacks, as well as the video recording. So we do have social media. If you want to take a minute to follow us on social media, we share information about ECHOs as well as resources that people send out to us. So I'm really excited to stop sharing and turn the time over to Dr. Matt Wappett, who is our director and is going to be talking to us about why we're doing this ECHO network and some of the information from the surveys.
Okay, I assume that means it's my turn.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you all for making time to join us today. We're excited to kick this off and to start a conversation, hopefully, around healthy relationships and sexuality for people with disabilities. The origin of this project came from discussions with the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council a few years ago when they were doing their last 5-year plan. And at that point in time, there was a desire to really get a better grasp on what was happening, specifically here within the state of Utah, around healthy relationship and sexuality education for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so over the past couple of years, the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice here at Utah State University has been working on gathering data around the state to kind of provide a picture of what is happening here in Utah. Now, I need to contextualize that because I know that not everybody here is from Utah. And so the data that we are going to present from the survey is very specific to our state, but the principles, some of the patterns, some of the concerns and other things that have come up through this process, I think are largely universal in the United States and in other parts of the world. So what I want to do is kind of provide a little bit of background, and I'm going to divide this up. I'm going to do a little bit of the presentation to provide a background and rationale for this, and then Alex Schiwal, who is the lead researcher on the data collection effort here in Utah, is going to kind of go through the results and paint a picture of what we found here in the state. So let me share my screen really quick because I do have some slides. Okay. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to start, and I think Janelle pointed this out earlier. We're going to be talking about some topics that not everybody's comfortable with. And I just want to acknowledge that right up front. This is something that, especially over the last decade or so, has become increasingly important, and we've become, as a society, increasingly aware of the importance of educating individuals with all disabilities about healthy relationships. In terms of an introduction, one of the common, I think, beliefs about individuals with disabilities is that they do not experience the same experience of sexuality, the same desire to have a relationship, and that they don't need the same things that everyone else, right, needs when they're looking at intimacy and when they're looking at right, connecting with others, whether in a relationship of any type. Now, the interesting thing is that individuals with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities can have fully developed and sexually capable bodies, even if they may function at a cognitively lower level. And the belief that sexuality is only for normal people really denies the innate sexual drive, the drive for relationships and intimacy that's present in all humans. In fact, as humans, we have a need to connect with other people. We have a need to be close to other people. Our body responds in very specific ways with physical touch and with being in the same space with someone who we love. In fact, one of the key factors for resilience, when we look at what makes a person resilient and what supports a person's mental health, one of the biggest parts is, do they have, right, relationships? You know, and those could be sexual relationships, those could be friendly relationships, whatever the case may be. But do they have people around them who support them, who they feel loved by? And so this is an important part of being human. This is an important part of being physically healthy, mentally healthy, socially and emotionally healthy. And denying relationships and sexuality for the population of individuals with disabilities is irresponsible and, in fact, can be dangerous. Some of the myths that we've perpetuated through society about individuals with disabilities and sexuality is, number one, people with disabilities don't feel the desire to have relationships or to have sex. And we know that that is not true. Myth number two, that people with developmental and physical disabilities are asexual, they're childlike, they're sexually innocent, they don't possess maturity, and it's difficult for them to learn about sexuality. This is a very common stereotype. We see it in films, we see it in research, we see it in popular culture, and yet as we have started to do this research within the past 20 to 25 years, we found that this is actually not true. Another myth that we perpetuate through our society is that people with disabilities are sexually impulsive. One of those sort of stereotypes is that they're oversexed and unable to control their sexual urges, and that men are aggressive, that women are promiscuous. These particular attitudes actually arise from the eugenics movement back in the early 20th century. And what we found is that these are not true. The reason that these occasionally happen in society is a lack of education and a lack of opportunity to teach people with disabilities about appropriate boundaries and about appropriate relationships. And then the fourth myth that we've perpetuated through society is that people with disabilities will not have relationships. They won't marry, they won't have children. And so there's no need to learn about sexuality. And yet again, as we are moving hopefully into a more enlightened era of understanding disability, the more we see that people with disabilities want to have relationships, they want to get married, they want to have families, they want to experience the full range of human emotions that everybody else experiences. And honestly, there's no reason why they can't. The important thing is that we provide the necessary supports to make that happen. Now, a lot of these myths we take for granted. We don't question, because a lot of these myths have been embedded in our culture for hundreds of years. Many of these myths were very, very strongly sort of reinforced during the eugenics era in the early 20th century, when we would sterilize people with disabilities so they couldn't reproduce, and when we would isolate people with disabilities to keep them apart from others. And so we're fighting about 150 years of history when we're trying to talk about these issues. And because we're fighting a long history and some deeply embedded social constructs, it can be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about these topics. Now, the facts, though, when we start to look at more recent data, and there are a lot of groups that are doing this work. There's a lot of work going on around relationships and disability in Australia, in Europe, here in the United States. And some of the common patterns that we found is that, number one, children with developmental disability have a normal physical maturation, even if they may have slowed emotional and cognitive development. Their body continues to develop normally. They have hormones, right? They experience puberty. And so there's a need to provide education that builds skills and appropriate language and appropriate behavior in public as these children with disabilities develop and mature. Fact number two is that our societal discomfort with disability and sexuality makes it easier to view anyone with a disability as an eternal child. And what that does is that denies a person their full humanity. I think that the ultimate example of this was something that happened about 15 years ago in Seattle, Washington, in a case called the Ashley X case. If you're not familiar with the Ashley X case, I would highly encourage you to go look it up. I'll give you a quick summary, though. Ashley X was a young child who ended up contracting a virus, a viral illness that did a significant amount of brain damage and left Ashley in a largely paralyzed state. She couldn't speak, she couldn't sit up, she couldn't feed herself, and she ended up needing full-time care. Now, what happened is she got this disease when she was, I believe, 6 or 7, and as she got older, she started to develop sexually. She started to grow, she went into puberty, she started to menstruate, and her family became very concerned about this. And their family went to their doctor, and they convinced some of the doctors there in Seattle to make Ashley essentially a perpetual child, so that she wouldn't experience puberty, so that she wouldn't experience sexual abuse, because the family wouldn't be able to be a care provider all the time. And so they ended up giving Ashley high doses of estrogen, which stunted her growth, which stopped her from growing. They removed her breast buds. They gave her a hysterectomy so that she would not menstruate. And they essentially made her a perpetual child. Literally did that. Now, that's, of course, the logical extreme. That's physically making somebody a perpetual child, but it is a reflection of our societal attitudes, where a lot of times we believe that people with disabilities are perpetual children housed within adult bodies. I think it's important to challenge those assumptions. Fact number 3 is that education and training are the key to promoting healthy and mutually respectful behavior and relationships, regardless of the disability. Self-determination and self-awareness are key to protecting yourself and to understanding who you are and how you fit in the world and how you relate with other people. And so it's become increasingly important that we be aware of these issues and that we spend time training on these issues. Now, some of the facts that make this urgent: number 1, the American Academy of Pediatrics reports that children with disabilities are sexually abused at a rate that's 2.2 times higher than children without disabilities. If we look at statistics as kids age, 68 to 83% of women with developmental disabilities will be sexually abused or assaulted at some point in their life. And 52 to 65% of men will be sexually abused and assaulted. Now, some of the factors that lead to these appalling statistics are that, number 1, sometimes these individuals are less able to defend themselves. If we go to the Ashley X case, right, where she was unable to move, she wouldn't be able to defend herself against a caregiver who wanted to take advantage of her. But also, often people with disabilities, because they haven't been educated about safety, personal safety, and otherwise, they're not alert to potentially dangerous situations. How to identify, right, who might be a predator and who might not be, how to avoid, right, being alone with somebody who might be dangerous. They don't know how to report abuse. They're not taught what abuse is, and therefore they don't know that it should be reported. Many people with disabilities want approval and affection, just like we all do, but because they don't get it in typical ways, they seek it in unhealthy ways and often dangerous ways. Another reason that influences this is that a lot of people with disabilities, especially with more intensive needs, have caregivers who have to provide intimate care, changing diapers, helping in the bathroom, right? And these open up opportunities for, right, abuse, assault, if somebody's not aware of what is proper and what is not proper. And then the other one is that a lot of people with disabilities are compliant to authority. They've been trained and they've been raised in a system where they've been taught to just obey what other people tell them. And therefore, because they want to be liked just like everybody else, they tend to go along with what somebody tells them, whether it's appropriate or not. Now, the interesting thing is that all of these factors that influence these statistics can be addressed through appropriate training and education. So some of the common social mistakes that we see when we're thinking about healthy relationships and disability, and some of the factors that make it clear that we're not doing a good job at training these things are different types of errors that we see frequently in public from individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Sexual self-stimulation, right? Somebody who's unaware that they shouldn't be touching themselves in a public place, right? Saying something inappropriate in public because they don't understand what those words mean or what the meaning of a particular concept is, right? And so they say that. There's a lot of stranger friend errors, right? If somebody hasn't been trained about appropriate touch, you may find somebody hugging or kissing strangers, right, in public, being overly familiar, being very, very touchy when maybe that's not totally appropriate, and misunderstanding ideas of boundaries and consent. Again, both of these types of mistakes are, again, an indication of a lack of training, but they can put people with disabilities at a real risk for sexual exploitation and, in many cases, breaking the law with real-world consequences. Just this morning, I was on the phone speaking with a service provider who's taking on a client who is currently on the sex offender registry. Why? Because this individual had not been trained and ended up touching somebody in an inappropriate way in a public setting, yeah, got in trouble because nobody had trained him on what appropriate boundaries were and what is good touch, what is bad touch, all of these things that a lot of times we take for granted in the population of non-disabled individuals is not at all even acknowledged or trained within the population of individuals with disabilities. So with that said, before I turn it over to Alex, why is this echo important? Well, kind of with that really broad, really quick background, I think it's important to acknowledge that this echo is important because regardless of disability, everyone has feelings, sexual desires, and a need for intimacy and closeness. Everyone wants to be loved. And it's important that because of that, we help people understand, what does that mean? What does a healthy relationship look like? In order to behave in a sexually responsible manner, people need to have skills, knowledge, and support. They need to understand concepts like consent, good touch, bad touch, what's okay in private, what's okay in public, right? All of these things become really, really important to functioning within society. Youth with disabilities are far more vulnerable to sexual abuse than their peers, as we've seen through the American Academy of Pediatrics, but we see those statistics repeated over and over and over again in every state across the United States and in other countries. We see much, much higher rates of abuse and assault among people with disabilities. So relationship education has to include information to prevent sex abuse, to encourage reporting, and to helping people who are victims seek appropriate treatment. And that's what a typical population gets, whether it's through home, school, a service provider, whatever the case may be. And yet people with disabilities don't receive that information and therefore don't know how to report and to handle difficult situations. Youth with disabilities experience and feel the same discomfort and suffer the same lack of information as their peers, but they have less access to accurate and appropriate information, as I was saying. I think about my kids, right? My kids got some education in school. My kids got education at home, right? We had conversations about this, and yet my kids also learned a lot on their own, right? There was books, there were things they could read, there was information that the school sent home for them. Somebody with a disability who maybe doesn't have the same reading level, right, isn't going to be able to access that information, isn't going to be able to take advantage of some of the information that is publicly available. And therefore, it's important that we figure out ways to adapt and accommodate the learning needs of this population to make this information, which can be difficult to understand, more accessible and down to earth. It's important to note in the very end here, though, that our personal discomfort with this topic around relationships and sexuality doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to equip individuals with disabilities with the knowledge they need to be safe and responsible. And if there's anything I think this ECHO is intended to do, it's to really help open up a conversation about that, to help us get over some of that discomfort and to help us really develop some of that knowledge that is necessary to keep individuals with disabilities in our society safe. So with that said, Alex, do you want me to keep going with the slides or do you want to share your screen?
I guess you can just keep going so there's fewer interruptions.
Okay, you just tell me when to switch.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the training needs assessment that we did. This is just about educational and informational needs across these topics. So you can go to the next slide, Matt. So this is a little bit about the scope of work and why we did this. We contracted with the Utah Parent Center and the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council to do this needs assessment. You can see the objectives here of our scope of work, and this was the first objective, which is a statewide needs assessment and evaluation to determine what the current training and resources available were for adults with disabilities and their families, and also providers regarding abuse, neglect, relationships, and sexuality. And then after we finished this, we updated curriculums and then determined what the best steps were going forward. Next. Okay. So this included a survey, and this was for self-advocates or individuals with disabilities over the age of 18, family members and guardians, and service providers, including anyone who works with the disabilities, people with disabilities, and also people that work in rape and crisis and domestic violence shelters. So we recruited people via mailing lists, social media, and we also did a promoted KSL article, an ad campaign. And so in that article, we talked about the statistics regarding abuse of people with disabilities, and that we're trying to conduct this survey to see what the training and educational needs are. That article got a lot of views and attention. People said we had no idea this was a problem. And then a lot of people were directed to the survey through that. So the survey was online and smartphone accessible, and it was via Qualtrics. And we split it up using skip logic for family members, individuals with disabilities, and professionals. So depending on which group, it was 15 to 30 questions. It was plain language accessible. And this was all approved by USU and the Department of Health institutional review boards for human subjects. So we had probably about 200 people who clicked into the survey. And then for whatever reason, there was a lot of attrition, people who didn't fill out the informed consent, people who didn't have complete responses. So we had 109 complete responses, and broken down by category, we had 18 adults with disabilities, 44 family members or legal guardians, and 47 professionals, including people who work in the disability field and people who work in crisis centers. Okay. And on top of this, we also recruited for focus groups. So at the end of the survey, we asked if you'd like to do a focus group to find out more information, to get more information about this. We'll link you out and you can chat with us and answer these questions more in depth. We had 10 people who completed these focus groups via Zoom one-on-one. They were recorded, transcribed, and we analyzed them. The questions we asked aligned with the survey, but they were much more in depth. So we asked, what information have you received about adults with disabilities and sexuality, healthy relationships, boundaries, abuse, and neglect? Was the information you received useful? Why or why not? Have you ever encountered barriers or issues trying to get this information, support, or training about these topics? If new training or information was available, what topics would you like to see covered? What would be the best way to obtain this information? And anything else they'd want us to know. And for the survey, very similar topics were covered, but we were able to use a lot more skip logic. We had subcategories for all of these. And so we asked them about any previous training or information they received about abuse, healthy relationships, sexuality, and intimate relationships for adults with disabilities. And for abuse, healthy relationships, and sexuality and intimate relationships, we had subcategories for all of these. So for example, abuse, we asked about sexual abuse, financial abuse, neglect, exploitation. Healthy relationships, we asked about boundaries, healthy communication, that sort of thing. And sexuality and intimate relationships, we asked about consent, boundaries, self-protection, and appropriate behaviors. So those were all of the subcategories covered. And then we asked generally about those topics. We asked them to rate if the information was useful, their ability to find information on these topics, barriers to receiving training and information, and then the future needs for training and information about all of these topics. So I'm just going to go by these categories of the topics covered, broken down by the different populations. So when asked about if they had ever received information on these topics, for abuse, professionals, 77% had received information ever. Family and guardians had 30% had received information, and 50% of adults with disabilities had received information. But you'll see at the bottom here, this little asterisk, that figure only reflects 7 participants, since the total number was much lower. For healthy relationships, again, you'll see that same trend where professionals, 37% had received any information, family and guardians, only 7% had received information about healthy relationships in adults with disabilities. And again, adults with disabilities 50% had received information, but that's only 7 of them. And then same thing with sexuality and intimate relationships. So the takeaway here is that professionals had received more than twice as much information as families and guardians and adults with disabilities. So the information is not getting to the people who need it most. I think that's the key takeaway from the previous training and information. Another thing that was really interesting across all of the groups is that the information received, the rate was much higher for information about abuse and much lower for information about healthy relationships and sexuality and intimate relationships. So we're getting a lot of information out there about preventing abuse or what to do with abuse. But I think that key information, like Matt was talking about, is how to have a healthy relationship and consent and those key pieces of information. There's very little out there about that, and it's not getting to the people who need it. When we asked where they had received this information, professionals had gotten it from Adult Protective Services, the Utah Parent Center, the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice, that's us, the Disability Law Center, crisis centers, Planned Parenthood, employers, and self-directed online searches. Family members and guardians had gotten the information from schools, the Parent Center, Utah State University Healthy Relationships class, churches, and primary care doctors. And adults with disabilities had gotten their information from independent living centers, youth groups, family or home, and self-directed online searches, therapists, and their places of employment. So we can see some big differences in where they're getting their information, but this also helps us know how to best get the information out to these different groups. This was a really interesting piece. We asked if they know where to find information on all of these topics. It's very similar to anyone who had received previous information. For abuse, 70% of professionals knew where to find it, and only a third of family and guardians and adults with disabilities. And then for healthy relationships, about half of professionals knew where to find it, and very few of the family and guardians and adults with disabilities knew where to find it. And then those numbers are even lower for sexuality and intimate relationships. So again, the same trend, professionals have more knowledge of where to find information and resources compared to the family and guardians and adults with disabilities. So we have a huge gap here in who's had information and resources and who knows where to find it. So now we're getting into barriers in accessing information, resources, and training. I think the biggest one that shouldn't surprise anyone here is there's just a lack of available information and people knowing where to find it. Some of this is integrated from the focus groups as well, as people just don't want to talk about these things. I think that shouldn't be very surprising to any of you who are here from Utah or other states as well. There were a lot of concerns about morality and people feeling uncomfortable discussing these topics or not knowing where to start. As Matt discussed, there are stigma and attitudes towards people with disabilities that are infantilizing. And I think that relates to this last point, is the lack of understanding of the importance and need for training and resources on these topics. This was in a lot of our short answer responses and the focus groups, saying people had no idea that this was as big of an issue as it is, and that a lot of the stigma around people with disabilities makes people think that these resources aren't needed, but the statistics tell us otherwise. So getting into the future training and resources, we asked, do you see a need for more training and resources on these topics? And overwhelmingly, I think it was 96% of all of the groups said, yes, we need more training and resources on these topics. One thing that I thought was really interesting, we asked, where do you think that these trainings should come from, or where do you think people should get this information? Family members and guardians said it was really important and they all wanted more information on this. But 70% of them thought that the individuals with disabilities that they care for should receive this information at home rather than in courses with professionals and other formats. So that is a really interesting piece that I think, because they're not currently getting this information at home and it may be inaccurate or not comprehensive. Most preferred a combination of in-person and online options. I think that shouldn't be surprising given where we're at. We're doing this on Zoom right now. And then the top requested training and resources were the ability to talk to other professionals, case studies, understanding like what other people are dealing with and how to respond, conversation guides. For example, say someone comes to you with a situation, or say a person with a disability reports that they've been assaulted or had a weird situation. How do you handle that? How do you discuss it with them? And then curriculum on these topics that's better suited and more widely available and easier to find. Okay, and next steps. Our idea was, based on all of that feedback, an ECHO would be a great idea to bring people together, present case studies, allow people to converse across groups, learn, discuss, and share the information. So that's what we are doing now. We're developing additional trainings and sharing the trainings more broadly. And then we're also developing some conversation guides and fact sheets for various populations. They're going to be plain language so everyone can access them and widely distributed. Okay, any questions? I think we're open for the question session now, if that's right, Janelle.
Yep, so far there's none in chat. So if anybody wanted to just come unmute and ask any questions.
One thing I will add is that we do have a comprehensive, I think, 45-page report on all of the data we collected. So if you are interested in reading a 45-page report, you can email me and I'm happy to send that to you.
In all of our spare time.
Yep.
Yeah.
It might be good to drop that in the chat, Alex.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I'm Nashta Solanki from African Foundation, and I want to ask you about a person with disability. She's 95% physically disabled, and she's in love with someone. So her feeling is good or bad?
So if I couldn't understand the very last part of what you said, would you repeat that?
Yeah, I have a question. A person with disability, she's 95% disabled, and she's in love with someone. So her feeling is good or not? Can you?
I'll give you my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, it's very natural as a human being to want to love somebody and to want to be loved back. And so that is just, I don't think there's a good or bad to it necessarily. I think it's just a natural part of being a human. And the best thing that we can do is provide people with the training and support they need so that if and when they do get into a relationship, they can do that safely. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry?
Were you going to ask something else?
Yeah, I want to ask how we support.
Oh, how do you support the individual?
Yeah.
That's a very big question. And I would need to know a little bit more about the individual and their background, but that's part of what this training series is going to be about, is some of the skills and knowledge that you would need to support an individual like you're talking about, and how they can have an appropriate romantic relationship. So I don't think I can get into the details today, but I would encourage you to, come back for the rest of this training series. And we'll be talking about a lot of those skills and knowledge that you would need to provide appropriate support. Is that
Okay,
helpful?
thank you. Thank you, Matthew.
Yep, absolutely.
And then Alex or Matt, there is a question around the guides, conversation guides, and are they available now, or is the problem that there are none available at this time?
Yes, I just responded in the chat. So in addition to doing this needs assessment, we also did a fairly comprehensive review of different curriculum and resources that were out there. And we found a few classes that were available through like Planned Parenthood and some other classes and different guides that were specific for these topics and people with disabilities, but there were not any sort of conversation guides, fact sheets, quick and simple resources. So we have contracted with the Utah Parent Center and UDDC to create these over the next year.
Yep. So we will be working on a whole series of conversation guides that will be coming out, as Alex said, in the next year or so.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, what I'm going to do is propose or share the case. So this is an email that came to one of our hub members, and we just want to have a discussion in our small breakout groups about it and how each of you react to it or how you might respond to it. So the email itself is, "To whom it concerns, I'm reaching out to you regarding the flyer that was emailed to me about the sexual education and healthy relationship classes for children and adults with disabilities. The flyer included a class topic labeled Gender Expression and Identity. Is this meant to teach our children to explore their gender identity? I would like to inquire about the rationale behind the program and its potential benefits. As the parent of a child with Down syndrome, I am aware of the challenges that come with communicating complex concepts to individuals with special needs. I look to your expertise as a trusted source of reliable information and resources, not as a proponent of agendas or inappropriate information for children. We as responsible parents teach our children about stranger danger, appropriate boundaries, and their God-given gender. This is not your responsibility. Please provide me with more information on this matter." So now, as we go into our small breakout groups, there will be a hub member that's going to take notes, and just take a minute to introduce yourselves, get to know each other on the call, and share your thoughts about what that email you would either share back or what your thoughts were on that email. Hi, welcome back. We're just waiting for all the breakout groups to come back. Hopefully you all had some great discussions.
It was really very great.
Good. I'm excited to hear how everybody's discussion went. Are we all back, Tony?
We want more time.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we could have had a lot more time. So
It's all good. We can do it as a large group.
that's what we do, have some time for that. So I gave you guys 20 minutes in your breakout groups. Sometimes you never know whether that's enough time to have discussions or people are like, okay, let's come back from breakout groups. But Matt, since you volunteered, what did your group discuss about that email?
We had a broad discussion. And I mean, I think right up front, I'm sure this came up in all the groups, an acknowledgement that we live in a region and a state where there are certain values that may not agree with how you approach teaching these topics. And yet the general consensus, I think, and anyone from the group's welcome to jump in, was that even if you don't agree with those topics, it's important that people have access to that information. And that, whether the family chooses not to let their child attend, that family should be able to get that information and be able to share it, if they want to be the ones who share it. But it's dangerous to really limit that information and say, oh, people don't like this, people are uncomfortable with this, so we're not going to talk about it. We had some personal experiences shared in the group where it had real negative impacts on the family from not having access to that type of information. And so you have to walk a fine line. I think if there's anything to summarize it up, you have to walk a fine line, right? And making sure that you're offering the information, but also letting parents, whether they come in and review it ahead of time or whether they take it and present it at home on their own, whatever the case may be. But just because people don't like it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And I don't know, does anyone else from the group want to jump in? Okay.
No, it sounds like you must have summarized it really well, Matt.
Okay.
Sometimes
It
it's
was
harder.
very eloquently summarized. And yes, and just to kind of reiterate, it was my personal story. Come from a very conservative background and really wish that this knowledge would have been available when my son was younger. And it's a scary topic, scary taboo topic. But then again, any topic is if we don't know what it is. Disability is a very taboo topic until, 19 something when people said this isn't right? But the more knowledge that comes out, the more understanding and respectable, I think that's the right word, people can become more embracing of that knowledge that we gain from it.
I agree. That's a great point. Thank you guys for sharing. Erin, how about from your breakout group? Anything that was shared different or?
Yeah, so we started off very similar, talking about how there are limitations here in Utah, but kind of also expanded it a little bit to, I think one of our members had a really good point of, even though you don't agree with this information, people still need access to it, right? We still want to provide reliable information. And then also Tim brought up a really good point that, a lot of people have that lack of knowledge about these topics. And as a parent, that might be a scary thing because if your child attends a session like this, that might lead them to asking the parent questions that they might not have the answer to. And then they feel stuck and feel like they don't know how to proceed. So we kind of came down to there's a need for this broader education on all fronts. And then also, does it help, how we would respond to that? Does it help with having the parent review the curriculum beforehand or, having a meeting with them to go over what is actually talked about so that they understand that this information is, accurate, it's factual, it's not just trying to sway someone's opinion one way or the other.
Yeah, and I love that point of what if then my child asks me questions that as a parent, I'm not able to answer. I think that's a really valid point. Sometimes we don't want those questions, so we stop those topics. Thanks for sharing. Allie, how about in your group?
Alex took notes for us.
Oh, good. Alex, how about you?
Too.
Okay, so again, we had a lot of the same thoughts as the other groups, but I think something else that we discussed is it was actually Allie who had this email and who submitted it. So I think that was really helpful for us to get more background. But the class itself that they were concerned about, they said it's based on facts and science, not opinions. And it doesn't have to align with their values and beliefs, but it teaches them and gives them knowledge to have empathy and understanding and respect for people with other identities. And then we got into a conversation about how this is extra important in Utah, given the high youth suicide rates for people who are LGBTQ+. And so that's another reason it's important, because people who have that identity and may feel like they don't have support, or people who don't have understanding of that. And if they get that information, they may be less likely to bully or ostracize people. And so we thought that was really important. Then we also talked about how individuals with autism are much more likely to have a non-gender conforming identity. And this information is really vital for those populations as well. And how just responding to this person and providing statistics and why this information is helpful for all people, whether or not it's their identity, and that we're not trying to change anyone's, God-given gender. We're just providing information, not attempting to do anything that they would consider harmful. Did I cover everything, Allie or Marty?
Yeah, I think so. And then you guys kind of brought up allowing the parents beforehand to review the information that was given out. I think that could be beneficial in certain situations. In other situations, I think that they just see the headlines and the titles and they just pull back even harder. So it is, like Matt said, a really fine line of understanding, just taking it individual by individual and case by case and family by family, to make sure that you're getting the most accessible education out to them in any way that they're going to receive it.
Yeah. Because it takes us like 7 or 8 times to really hear something before we even start digesting it. And so, like you just said, Allie, that multiple ways of getting that information out to individuals or families or the community and having those discussions, I think is really great. Does anybody else have any insights or thoughts that they would like to share? The lovely awkward pause on Zoom. See, if we were all in person, this room would be just bustling with conversation, but we all are on mute, and so we don't share anything. Well, I'm really excited about this ECHO series that's going on. Next month, we do have Julie and Allie presenting to us on their Tetons. We have some topics around what is consent, some healthy communications, also mandatory reporting. So please continue to join us for this ECHO series. And if you have a case that you want to present and talk about, like I might say your name wrong, Nithitha, how do you pronounce your name? Nishta?
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if you want to share your case with us, but reach out to us, or Sarah, if you wanted to talk about your case, please email us. And hopefully we will see you guys next month on October 28th. Thank you all. I'm going to give you guys 15 minutes of your day back. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.